Today is Thursday, April 25th. What to know about a first-of-its-kind meeting between world leaders and the well-known name launching his presidential campaign today. Plus the NFL draft and updated rules for the Oscars. Then hang out after the news for Thing to Know Thursday's bonus interview. Welcome to The Newsworthy. All the day's news in less than 10 minutes. Fast, fair, fun, and on the go. I'm Erica Mandy. Thanks so much for being here. You ready? Let's do this. President Trump is pushing back against Democrats, telling reporters he'll fight, quote, all the subpoenas, saying their efforts are political. But in that process, the Hill reports he made a mistake, saying if Democrats try to impeach him, he would take it to the Supreme Court. Well, as we talked about earlier this week, that's not how that would work. Congress has the final say about impeachment, not the Supreme Court. Either way, former presidential candidate Hillary Clinton wrote a rare op-ed for the Washington Post calling for televised hearings like what happened during the Watergate scandal. Clinton says Russia interfering in the election and the president's behavior about the investigation needs to be examined, and it's important to help the public understand what's really outlined in the Mueller report. Because Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report on the Russia investigation that was released last week is more than 400 pages, with a lot of legal jargon. It also has a lot of detail about the president's actions. So this fight is far from over. The first face-to-face meeting between North Korean leader Kim Jong-un and Russian President Vladimir Putin is happening today. Reuters reports so far the two shook hands and talked about progress in front of the media. The Wall Street Journal says Kim is likely looking for a few things, including a boost in his image, a chance to be seen with another world leader. Because this comes just a couple of months after he met with President Trump back in February. And remember, Trump and Kim could not come to an agreement. They both walked away with no deal. Today's meeting in Russia may also be about nuclear weapons and money. Right now, UN sanctions keep countries like the U.S. and Russia from trading with North Korea until North Korea gets rid of its nuclear weapons. As for Putin, he likely wants to reestablish his role and power in that nuclear weapons talk. Still, don't expect too many big agreements or changes to come from this. Today's the day. Media reports say former Vice President Joe Biden will likely announce he's running for president in 2020. His announcement today has been expected for a while now, although some questioned if he would go through with it after facing recent criticism. Remember, multiple women said last month that he made them uncomfortable by getting too close and touching them inappropriately throughout his political career. But sources tell CBS News he'll be coming out with a video announcement today and a fundraiser tonight. 2019 is now the worst year for measles in decades, with several more months to go. The AP reports the number of measles cases is now nearly 700 in the U.S., the highest it's been in 25 years. Even though measles was eliminated in the U.S. back in the year 2000 because of the vaccine, experts say misinformation has since turned parents against the vaccine, making kids vulnerable to the highly contagious illness. Facebook is planning ahead in case it has to pay the U.S. government a big multi-billion-dollar fine. The company set aside $3 billion because the FTC is investigating Facebook for possible privacy violations. MarketWatch says Facebook expects to have to pay $3 to $5 billion, which, by the way, would be a record fine for a technology company. The World Health Organization just put out its first ever guidelines for kids and screen time. And as you might guess, they recommend children spend less time in front of screens and more time moving around and reading. Here are a couple of the specifics. Infants and 1-year-olds should spend 0 time in front of screens, and children between 2 and 4 should only use screens for up to 1 hour at a time. The recommendations are part of broader guidelines about physical activity and sleep, and there is some criticism. Some people say the guidelines didn't consider what kids are actually doing with the screens, and there isn't enough evidence to fully support the screen time limits. A quick break to hear from today's sponsor. America's beverage companies are working together to support families as they reduce the sugar in their diets. Coke, Dr. Pepper, and Pepsi are providing more great-tasting options with less sugar or no sugar at all, putting clear calorie labels on every product, and working with public health organizations and other national and local partners to build stronger, healthier communities. With more choices, smaller portions, and less sugar, American families can find the balance that's right for them. You can learn more about these 3 competitors working together at balanceus.org. That's balanceus.org. Now back to the news. The 2019 NFL Draft gets underway tonight in Nashville, Tennessee. Each of the 32 football teams will be picking newly eligible players in each of the 7 rounds of the draft. First round is tonight, but this will continue through Saturday. The draft will be on the NFL Network, ABC, and ESPN. And in basketball, the Portland Trail Blazers are heading to the Western Conference semifinals thanks to a half-court three-pointer at the buzzer. Star player Damian Lillard made it from 37 feet away to win the game. Scientists think they've detected a Mars quake. Of course, that's an earthquake, but on Mars. NBC News says NASA's InSight lander sensed a seismic signal earlier this month, but scientists are still working to confirm it. If it was in fact a Mars quake, it'll be the first one ever detected. Why does that matter? Well, it means the technology NASA has is working, and that means NASA is in place and ready to detect bigger Mars quakes, which can actually provide important insights about the internal workings of the red planet. It's official now. Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime, and other streaming services are still eligible to win an Oscar, even when their movies live mostly on the small screen. Bloomberg reports the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences made the decision once and for all, despite some Hollywood heavyweights like director Steven Spielberg pushing to change those rules. And speaking of Netflix, the Wall Street Journal says several of the most popular shows are all reruns, like the #1 show, The Office. Problem is, Netflix may not be able to hold on to those types of shows for much longer, since some of the companies who own the rights to the shows will be launching their own streaming services and may take those shows back. For now, Netflix has the rights to The Office through 2021. All right, that's it for the main news today, but it's now time for Thing to Know Thursday, where a different expert explains a different thing to know only on Thursdays after the news. Do you know who makes your clothes? Or if those workers that made them had safe working conditions? That's what we're talking about today, because 6 years ago this week was the largest tragedy the fashion industry has ever seen. More than 1,100 people died in the Rana Plaza factory collapse in Bangladesh on April 24, 2013. And factories like that one made clothes for many American and European companies. So today, my guest is Jessica Kelly. During a life-changing trip to India, she saw firsthand some of the issues with the supply chain and fashion industry. So she went on to become the founder and CEO of Threefold. It's a tech platform that connects fashion brands to ethical factories. She's here to provide some insights for consumers like us. Here's my conversation with Jessica Kelly. Hi, Jessica. Thanks so much for coming on the Newsworthy.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm such a fan. I'm so excited.
So I want to dive into what happened 6 years ago. What caused this tragedy in Bangladesh in 2013 that killed more than 1,100 factory workers?
A couple key things happened that caused the Rana Plaza collapse. And they're actually common problems that do happen quite often in Bangladesh, although they don't normally end up at this large of a level. But the first thing was Rana Plaza was actually built to be a residential building. So that means that it wasn't supposed to be commercial. It didn't account for the extra weight of the machinery from the factory. The second thing is it was approved to be a 6-story building, and they actually built an 8-story building instead. So again, not accounting for the architecture and what it needs to support that kind of weight. The third thing that happened was on the day of the collapse, visible cracks had shown up in the had formed in the structure of the building. The factory, however, was on a deadline with their brands and said that it wasn't a big deal, told their staff to go in and not worry about it and get back to work. They had deadlines to meet. Now, you have to keep in mind, as a garment worker in Asia, you are typically paid monthly. And this happened on April 24th, which means that they were near the end of the month, but they were about to get their pay. So leaving didn't only likely mean they lost their job, but it would also mean they would lose 3 weeks of pay they had already worked. So everyone went back inside, put it behind them, and went back to work. So then the fourth thing that happened, in developing countries, it is very common for the power to cut off. When that happens, a generator kicks on to bring up the power again. So this generator was placed on the roof of the building of Rana Plaza. So when the power cut off that day, the generator kicked on, vibrating the building, which then turned those cracks into a full building collapse, killing 1,134 people and injuring over 2,000.
So you mentioned the deadlines that the companies give these factories. What role do Western and American companies play in that?
It's almost collectively a problem because the brands all need the same pieces at the same time. The factory is working with, let's say, 40 brands. So one brand saying, we want you to pay your workers more. You need to make sure you're being safe with your conditions, doesn't affect the 39 others. And so it's almost this like highway effect of like everyone's driving by, but it's nobody's problem and everyone's too busy to to pull over to help the person that's stalled. So it's kind of that collective issue that creates this constant pressure, speediness to market, and just unreasonable prices that we're trying to put on these people and chase down to the $0 basically.
So after the collapse in 2013, a new agreement involving brands was put into place. Can you explain that agreement and where do things stand now, 6 years later?
Yes. So immediately following the incident, the Bangladesh Accord and the Alliance were formed between the factories in Bangladesh and American and European brands. It has made a huge difference because it created a buy-in from brands, factories, and workers to improve standards. Some of the things that has already done it as it worked through the last 5 years was it implemented safety committees and training. It did building inspections, which actually got over 89% remediation of factories up to code with most major issues. So simple things that were fixes like fire doors, extinguishers, things like that. They were all, though, behind on the bigger, more expensive issues like those structural codes that I mentioned earlier. So there's still much work to be done.
Let's talk about consumers here for a moment. One question is, are consumers paying attention to the clothes that they buy? And two, should we be doing anything to help make sure this accord is holding those factories accountable and keeping workers safe?
Yes. So the exciting thing is consumers are starting to pay attention and have been. And the unfortunate but great result that has come from this tragedy, it has created a massive movement from the fashion industry and consumers alike to stand up, speak up, and demand change, which is why we're in Fashion Revolution Week. Fashion Revolution is an organization that formed shortly after the collapse in the UK, and they have really become the cornerstone of this conversation for ethical and sustainability, like improvement standards within the industry from both consumers and the industry alike. So the great news is we're actually seeing that grow. So in 2017, we saw a 46% increase in Google searches for sustainable fashion and a 25% increase in ethical fashion searches. And we are seeing big brands like H&M and Gap creating green initiatives, which is really informing that mass market. And then we have this massive slew of small, ethical, sustainably made brands that have grown over the last 6 years. So there's a very woke and engaged consumer who's able to put their dollar into this movement. And there's some really great resources they can look to. You can look at the Good On You app and the Done Good Google Chrome extension. Those are both great resources to give you alternatives when you're shopping to new brands you can discover that are doing things ethically and sustainably.
You've said before that clothes don't necessarily need to be made in America to be ethical. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, so the way I see it, just having an American address for a factory is kind of like putting a Band-Aid on a problem, but not checking to clean and heal the actual wound. So we've had repeat situations occur and factories cracked down both in New York's garment district and in LA's fashion district for people being paid as little as $4 an hour and in bad working conditions. The UK has come up with similar situations as well. So while I will say it is definitely less often the case when we're here versus in a developing country like Bangladesh, it's simplifying a very complex problem. And so that's why at Threefold, we only work with ethically certified factories, which means that they have an outside auditing body coming in twice a year to check their building, their books, and their staff.
So some critics would say that if you put too many restrictions on these factories in Bangladesh, that the workers won't have a job at all because they'll have to shut down. What's the response to that criticism?
What we're trying to tackle is a very large problem. And so the solutions are going to be just as nuanced. So factories are going to have to take time as they improve their standards. We can't just increase pay overnight because that's going to mess up local economies at the same time. So there's a lot of things that go into it, and we need to remember we're in this for the long haul. All of those small steps can actually shift the industry. It's going to take all of us, but we can definitely do it.
And you can read more about this topic, where this issue stands now, and how you can get involved in today's show notes. You'll also find a link to an event Jessica Kelly's company, Threefold, is holding tonight in New York City. Or, as always, you can learn more about any of the stories mentioned in this episode. To find those show notes, go to thenewsworthy.com, click episodes, and look for today's date. Thank you so much for listening today. And as always, The Newsworthy is here for you by 4 in the morning every weekday. We'll chat again tomorrow. Have a great day.